Let's talk about the search for a job that you don't just tolerate, but one that actually makes you happy. A job that doesn't just pay the bills. It's a journey so many of us are on, and today, we're going to follow one person's story. His winding, often kind of funny, and super relatable path to figuring out what fulfilling work really means.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's Sunday night. The weekend's almost over. And then, there it is. That sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. The dread. Because you know that in just a few hours, you have to go back to that job. It's a feeling that is way too common, and it's right at the heart of the story we're diving into.
So our narrator's story kicks off with a series of jobs that were, let's just say, less than ideal. In fact, they were pretty bizarre and uncomfortable. Looking back, you can see them as these huge flashing warning signs for what not to do with your life.
Okay, so get this. His first real job was propping up metal targets at a shooting range. He literally had to dive into a foxhole while bullets were whizzing over his head. He actually said it was, and I'm quoting here, the greatest motivation I ever had for going to college. Yeah, I can see why.
The next summer wasn't any better. Picture this. He's in the back of a sealed metal truck. It's 110 degrees, and his job is to spread the stuff he calls fiberglass gook into an insulation chipper. That's the kind of soul-crushing work that makes you really wonder where you went wrong in life. So then, finally, he lands what seems like a normal job, right? A bank teller. But it was just a terrible, terrible fit. No matter how hard he tried, his cash drawer was always off at the end of the day. The only reason they kept him on was because he was funny. It was so obvious this was not his calling.
But it was at this bank job, of all places, that he got a piece of advice that was truly pivotal. It was something that would stick with him for years and years, even though he totally wasn't ready to hear it at the time.
It came from his coworker, a really kind woman named Joy. She could see he was struggling, and she just looked at the 17-year-old kid and laid out a lifetime of wisdom in one simple sentence. The whole point isn't just to work. It's to find something you enjoy so much that it doesn't even feel like work.
And then she hit him with this, a really direct, heartfelt plea. It came from someone who felt like she'd made that very mistake herself. She just said, "Don't settle." That little seed of advice was planted, even if it was going to take a long, long time to grow. So, what did our guy do with this incredible life-changing advice from Joy? Well, he promptly ignored all of it. He went off to college, picked a practical major, economics, and then did what you're supposed to do. He chased the money. Landed a high-paying job in investment banking, and when that made him miserable, he just jumped to another bank. So no surprise here, right? This path of picking practicality over passion, well, it started to take a real emotional toll. That feeling we talked about at the beginning, it came back with the vengeance. And it even got a name. The Sunday Blues. It's that very specific kind of anxiety, that dread that's completely tied to the work week starting again. And for him, it became this constant, unwelcome guest every single weekend. And the feeling started to get worse. It would creep in earlier and earlier, sometimes hitting him on a Saturday night. He described it as this vague, heavy sense of dread he couldn't quite identify, until he finally admitted to himself what it was. It was the job. You know who else noticed how miserable he was? His girlfriend Anna, who later became his wife. And she started saying almost the exact same thing his old coworker Joy had told him all those years ago. The message was coming at him from all sides, but he still wasn't really listening.
So let me just ask you, does any of this sound familiar? Have you ever felt that slow creep of anxiety about work that just ruins a perfectly good weekend? Because it's usually a pretty big sign that something in your life is way out of alignment.
So he finally hit a breaking point. He started this frantic, almost panicked search for an answer, for any career that wouldn't make him feel this way. And it was this desperation that led him to a totally unexpected discovery.
He just started talking to anyone he knew who seemed to actually like their job. But nothing clicked. A happy lawyer, a teacher, an insurance adjuster, he'd hear about what they did, and it just didn't resonate at all. He started to think maybe the problem was just him. And then, out of nowhere, a breakthrough. During a totally routine meeting at his marketing job, his company brought in an advertising agency to run a focus group. And something about their process, how creative and analytical it was, it just fascinated him. For the first time in a long time, he felt a little spark of interest. So he just went for it. He took a huge leap of faith. He talked to one of the people from the agency, sent over his resume, and a few weeks later, he had a new job.
He was leaving the safe world of banking for the unknown world of advertising. A huge risk, but he just had to make a change.
And the change was immediate. That dread that had been haunting his weekends for years, it just disappeared, vanished. It was all the proof he needed that he was finally on the right track.
But the story doesn't stop there, because the real fulfillment, the big aha moment, it didn't come from some fancy new title. No, it came from the most ridiculous, most unexpected place you can imagine, and that's where he had his ultimate epiphany.
I mean, just look at the contrast between his old life and his new one. He went from a fancy investment banking office that made his friends jealous to starting at the absolute bottom of an ad agency. And his very first assignment, it was for their smallest client, a local petting zoo.
And this is the whole point. He and a coworker were given the job of figuring out how to get more petters to a petting zoo. And he said that, as ridiculous as it sounded, he had to admit that he loved that work more than anything he had ever done before. He was engaged, he was solving a problem, he was having fun, he was fulfilled.
So that brings us to the final question for you. His crazy path from a shooting range to a bank to an ad agency ended at a petting zoo. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't prestigious, but it was work that he absolutely loved. So what's the thing that might sound a little ridiculous to other people, but would make your Sunday blues disappear? What's your petting zoo?